welcome back to another episode.
If it restart, he clapped it with you. You all have to clap.
Okay, 3, 2, 1. Hello, hi, and welcome back to another episode of Thar Talks. And today, it is our honor to be interviewing the chief guest for Founders Day 2025, India's very own Harvey Specter, Mr. Nandan Kamath. Hello, hi, and welcome back to another episode of Thar Talks. And today, we will be interviewing our chief guest for Founders Day 2025, India's very own Harvey Specter, Mr. Nandan Kamath. It's an honor to meet you, sir.
Thank you.
And just before we dive in, I just had to say, me and Arav are so stoked to have you with us here in the studio. And the moment we got your background brief, we're like, whoa, is this legend really coming to meet us out of all people?
Like, we are honestly lucky to have you here with us.
Okay, first question. When people hear your story, Oxford, Harvard, Rhodes Scholar, it seems almost effortless. Was it like all smooth sailing along your journey, or were there bumps you had to endure?
Yeah, it's a good question and something I think about a lot. I started in a very, very well-endowed school, very stable and secure home. And I think those are very strong bases on which you could build. I played a lot of sport. So I played sport for the school. I played football, hockey, cricket, but then went on to play quite a high level of cricket for the state. So I was Karnataka captain at the junior levels. So in many ways, I think the strong base helps you to get a good start. And once you get a good start, you start building in gradual ways. Of course, there are obstacles along the way, but that solid start is a significant amount of privilege that one sort of gets a head start and a springboard with. And each of those compounds in many ways. And I feel like I can't say it was easy. You had to work very hard at each level. But the doors were always open to walk through. And that's a very significant part of the way I look at the opportunities I got. One leading to the other, doing well at one, opening another door. I never looked very long term in the things I wanted to do. I just looked at the next, you couldn't call it obstacle, but the next goal. And just breaking it down into smaller ways of achieving smaller goals, those smaller goals becoming bigger goals, and one thing leading to another. So, I mean, obstacles are bound to be there in any life. It could be just lack of time to do everything you want to do. It could be just getting sort of the right emotional sort of balance to sort of continue to aspire and work hard. Different things distract you at different times in your life. So I didn't face too many practical obstacles. I think so long as I worked hard and kept focus, the results came one after the other.
Makes sense.
That is very insightful, sir. And you said that sports gave you a strong base in what you actually wanted to do in life, and it taught you a few valuable things about life. What is one thing that all aspiring sports people should need if they want to possibly dream about achieving success?
Not just sports people. I think one of the things that I think a lot about is just grit and resilience. Grit and resilience to deal with failure, deal with success, and to come back another day and to start again. Sometimes success is more difficult to deal with than failure. Failure gives you a very clear target of what next, and
so that's
something you know work towards. Very often success is draining, and that needs a different form of resilience. And I feel like a huge part of life is both acceptance but also discomfort with the status quo of where things are. There are some things in the world you just have to accept that you're not going to change. But if you take the whole world as something that you're not going to be able to change, I think you can be very, very limited in your worldview. So that resilience is also the willingness and ability to fight back when you see something that you don't like and you feel like you can change. It could be something that is unjust. It could be the poor treatment of someone else, or even for that matter, yourself. So standing up for yourself, standing up for others. Not just sport, but sport gives you that in large quantities. It's a life skill that doesn't come along without having lived all of those experiences.
That is so true, sir. Arav?
So talking about success, so what's one belief about sport or success that like you've been hearing from a long time and you've changed your mind about? Like, let's say you might have heard it from maybe elders and all of those, that some stereotypical statement, and then your belief has changed because of experience?
Um, I would say watching lots of athletes very closely. A lot of my work relates to athletes, seeing their journeys, seeing them succeed, seeing them fail. You often associate success with an outcome.
Yeah,
It could be a medal. It could be winning a world championship. But actually, that is not success. Success is the journey that you travel along the way. And even in the eyes of athletes, the outcome is just an outcome for them. And the reality is that it can leave you very empty if you look at success as outcome oriented, because you very often, let's say, an Olympic aspirant, you work your whole life to get an Olympic medal.
Right.
And if that's your only goal and your only measure of success, you go and win that, let's say, an Olympic gold medal. What do you wake up the next day aspiring to do? Is your life's journey already over at 25 or 30? And that is the real challenge that we all have, is we are sold a dream that getting to somewhere is a notion of success, right? There's a goal and there's a destination. You get to that goal and that's success. But sport teaches you very, very differently that it's process. It's about being true to yourself, being honest and being authentic with your process, and just understanding yourself and being honest to what you want to become and who you want to be. And it's when all of that is in alignment, success of being a well-balanced human being is a new notion of success that, to me, sport taught me personally, but also observing many athletes at work. The mature ones realize that very quickly and orient their lives to just the day-to-day. And there's a very famous quote about the Olympics. They say it's not every 4 years, but it's every day. So it's what you do in all of those 4 years. It's not just competition day.
That is very relevant, so especially in this day and age, we tend to measure success by the amount of laurels we get. But but the people who really see us up there, they don't see the amount of hard work we put in every day, and that is what makes us a champion.
Yeah, if you really focus on the journey, it feels more rewarding than the outcome if you truly focus on it.
Yeah. Okay, sir. So working in any field of law, not necessarily sports law, means facing a lot of ethical dilemmas. Now, what is the biggest moral question you have had to ask yourself?
I mean, when they're not necessarily moral questions. When you are working for a client, you may not fully be aligned with either their opinion, or you personally may not want them to succeed at what they're doing. But I think professional responsibility comes over personal beliefs. And being a professional is a journey in and of itself, is to separate the personal and the professional, and to show up for your client, because that's the professional role that you're playing. There are many smaller dilemmas, right? Do you agree philosophically with the stance someone is taking? Do you want to defend someone who you think may not have done the right thing? But at the same time, everyone has the right to a solid defense. And the legal system requires you to put the best argument out. So are you shortcutting justice by defending someone who you feel may have done something inappropriate, illegal, wrong? In the large scheme of things, doing your job the best for your client is the morally right thing to do. So there can be these dilemmas of different sorts, and each professional deals with it quite differently. Similar to would a surgeon operate on someone who's murdered someone else? Right? Is that person worth saving? Every professional has dilemmas of different natures like that.
Well put and very well explained. So I'm sure our listeners will have a new light on this. I think we have plenty of aspiring law students in the school, and I'm sure at the end of this podcast they're going to have a completely different stance on what law is all about. Arav?
That's right. And sir, talking about legal systems, right? So rules are meant to ensure fairness in game. So what do you think that, like, how do you decide like when a rule needs to be challenged? Like, hey, this is not right, and that way.
See, the way we are regulated as human beings, it's not only through law and rules, right? There's so many other ways in which we're regulated. It could be the architecture of a place. You can walk through a door but you can't walk through a window.
That's right.
And you're regulating every bit of conduct. There's also the business and markets that regulate us. The cost of something will determine whether you can buy something or not, your personal situation. But the most significant one is just what you would call social morality around you and culture. It is probably the most significant regulator, more than law. Is what is the right thing to do in that context? What does your community believe? What does your family do in a particular situation? The values that are around you. It is not that all of these four things are in constant conflict,
Yeah.
but very often there will be a time when the rules, which are less dynamic than I would call culture, may have reached a point where they're no longer compatible with current values and the culture and social morality. And at that point, you will see rules having to be modified. People pushing back, people asking for change, asking for reform. And that's a very fine balance of what comes first. Does cultural change come first or legal change? Or for that matter, if you want to bring cultural change, you bring a law in and you see something going wrong in culture. And that dynamic is quite an interesting one. There is no set formula to when you challenge a law. And also there's no set formula to when you bring a new law in. Like, for example, something that probably affects a lot of people is there's a new law banning gaming of a certain size type, right? So when you have a paid online gaming, there was a new law that came out a month ago, banning anyone from offering or playing those types of games. And what is that trying to do? It's trying to change the way people interact online. So these are constantly in conflict. When personally you challenge something, I think is a very personal decision. But as a society, when do we refresh laws? I think it's when that incompatibility between social values, so social morality, and the rules that exist today have changed. But at the same time, you also have to remain within the constitutional scheme, right? Of is your law that you're trying to bring constitutional? And what at the end of the day, what is the constitution? It's the social contract that the whole country has put together, and that way these are the basic principles around which we are going to live together.
Yeah. Okay.
That's a really unique perspective, sir. I mean, I honestly never thought of it that way.
And so you talked about the law that effectively banned all gambling apps and platforms online. Now, a lot of these platforms and apps have been sponsoring sports teams and sporting events.
Like even India was sponsored by Dream 11, the Indian
And
national cricket
Betway,
team.
Betano, they sponsor a lot of football clubs. How do you think this has impacted them, and has this effectively killed them?
I don't think it's necessarily killed the like all of the Betway and others, but how they would have to do business in India would have significantly changed. It is the law pushes focus to more casual gaming, where it's not about putting money and winning more money. It's trying to push also esports, which is actually now a sport that is being played at multi-sport events, including the Asian Games and other things like that. So it's trying to reshape digital behavior, and particularly of young people. Very often, digital interactions start through gaming. And do your first interactions have to be commercial in nature? Maybe not. Maybe you have to have a sort of a slower entry into the digital world. The digital world is also not particularly well regulated. It's a little bit still Wild West, lacking jurisdictional boundaries. I mean, the content we access, the services we access, are very often not in our own country. So we're actually governed technologically by a completely different morality of perhaps services and products that are developed elsewhere, but accessible to us in our context. And that's where you see also lots of flattening of values, leaving behind old traditions, and the globalization that technology has brought raises many of these new challenges, right?
Yeah, of course, sir. And I was doing some background research on LinkedIn, and according to a 2022 census, 50% of Indians are physically unfit. And referring to your organization, the Sports and Society Accelerator, your main goal is to effectively ensure a fully active India by 2047. How exactly do you plan to achieve this great aspiration?
Yeah, so it's very much like the North Star of where we need to get to as a country. Right now, the statistics, so the World Health Organization runs regular surveys. And you're right that at the adult level, we are at about 50% of people between 40 and 50% of Indians, adults, aren't getting enough physical activity. So they're inadequately physically active. That number goes to almost 75% when it gets to adolescence. So people your ages are just not moving enough. And that problem is getting worse. What happens as a result of that? It has impact. One, the obvious one is you're going to have less sports people. But most significantly, across the board, people are getting unhealthier. We are already the diabetes capital of the world.
Yeah.
Non-communicable diseases go up. Heart health, diabetic health, many other issues. And it's a little bit of a ticking time bomb where if you don't solve it, the scale of the problem goes up significantly. So this is not just about sport. It's about a country learning to move adequately. And there are many reasons for it. I mean, the obvious, easy ones to complain about are cell phones making everyone sit at home and get distracted. But there's a structure, and I talked about earlier being regulated by architecture, by culture, by markets, and also by laws, right? And all of these also come into play in terms of how much space we have to move. Do we have enough open space in our cities? In rural areas, there's lots of open space, but not much structure of someone will coach you or help you to be more active. Workplaces are very sedentary. How do you activate a workplace? I mean, you have a beautiful school with lots of facilities, but there are large number of schools which don't even have a playground. So really rethinking how schools can be more active, workplaces can be more active, even cities. How do you imagine a city where people aren't just sort of commuting in vehicles from one place to another, but there's more walkable spaces, there's more playable areas. And what we have is a reality that the statistics show that only 1 in 10 Indians has ever played organized sport. And that is an incredible statistic when you look at the size of India. And that is not people who are regularly playing. They've ever played organized sport. So imagine the number of people who aren't even getting the opportunity to play.
Mind-boggling.
And to bridge those gaps is, like you say, it's a very, it's laudable, perhaps even an impossible goal. But unless you aim for that, you are always going to be scrambling for, I did a little bit here, a little bit there. I looked at a small pocket here, a small pocket there. But the scale of the problem requires a solution that is population scale. That we're thinking very differently about how people are spending their time and spending their money. So what they call share of wallet and share of time. And there are many competing interests on that. So just changing the way we look at making sports cheaper, easier to play, giving more space for people to play, but also programming it into your daily life. It's not like go and get active now, but as you walk to school, and you have a school where you probably have to walk a lot within your premises, and that itself, that functional structure of that makes you fitter young people.
That's right. Yeah, and whatever Sir has said is 100% true. And as young individuals of this nation, to make positive change, we have to start now. And there is no better way to start than partaking in any type of physical activity that you can possibly take part in.
Because every small step that you take also counts.
Literally every step. And I think it's almost like you're doing national service by staying fit. As a young person, I mean, your health span is different from your lifespan. Your health span is how long you remain healthy. Your lifespan is how long you remain alive. Can you get those as close to each other as possible, right? And by simply doing that, you're removing the health burden on a country, right? So if the gap is large between your health span and your lifespan, you're spending the last 15, 20 years of your life probably immobile, needing medical care, needing services. And just by sort of figuring out how to live a healthier, more active life and staying active. Many people figure out how to do it till they're 15, 16, 17. You go to college or you get your first job or you move to a new city. You're not able to reorient your life to remain active.
Yeah, because many people after they retire or something like, or even after that, they're just like glued to screens or maybe any sedentary lifestyle like related to that.
Everyone who thinks of bunking games every evening, this is for you.
That's right. And also, sir, you see a lot of people on the big screen, like a lot of athletes and players of India. So, the question is, what's one thing that people don't realize about athletes getting to top, to like as they get to the top, reach the international levels and all that?
I'll switch the question a little bit. One thing people don't understand is, the reality is that it's tougher to stay at the top than to get to the top. It's a genuine reality. Many people figure out how to get there, but the reality is to get there, you have to do a bunch of things. But to stay there is a completely different set of things. And that's true about anything doing something excellently in a competitive field. If you're at the top, you're now suddenly the target of everyone from two who's below you, right? And they're changing their game to orient themselves to beat you.
Yeah, and
So-
because they see every move that you make. So
Yeah, so you are under the glare. And are you able to sustain excellence and your performance when you are the, in some sense, the prey rather than the hunter, right? And that is something that I've seen across the board. We've seen many athletes win once, but maybe never win again.
Yeah.
And it's not just strategic. It's about keeping your mind, keeping the clarity of why you're there. We talked earlier about the resilience and grit of coming back to win after you won once. And I think those are interesting themes that we don't think about a lot. We think, oh, just winning once and you're the champion. But at the end of the day, you have to live the life the next day as well, and the week after, the month after. And you might want to remain the champion. And you see the greatest athletes, they figured out how to win and to win consistently. And that requires not just your external game, but your inner game to be very, very there, and to understanding yourself, not just on the play field, but understanding your inner self.
Yeah. And it is most commonly said in sports fields that that your talent, your raw talent, can only take you so far. But the way you religiously practice your skill, hone your skills to razor sharp level, that's what really matters, and that's what's going to get you somewhere. And okay, so if someone read your books, the Booyah book, 30 years from now, what is one lasting message that you would like them to inculcate?
My book is oriented towards explaining why sport plays such a large role, not just in our daily lives, but in the broader range of global sort of politics, sociology, history, and the arcs of history. My message is, don't ignore the role of sport in society. It is where lots of important things happen, and staying in touch with sport, not just playing yourself, but understanding what's happening in the politics of sport, the rules of sport. Very often the biggest experiments are played out in sport before they played out in society. And I would just like sport to have a very prominent role in public discourse.
Yeah, that makes sense. So one more question. So for the future of sport in India, what do you think is more important? Stronger rules or stronger values, like stronger ethical values?
I would say they both have to come together. Sport is essentially a rule-based system. Without rules, there is no sport. Sport is essentially a bunch of made-up activities which are very controlled by rules. And if you don't stick to the rules, there is no competition that you can really credibly hold, right? Because you're essentially controlling a few constraints. You're adding some point systems, and those have to be based on the appropriate application of rules. Values, and we see a lot of dilution of values in sport, cheating of different sorts. It could be doping, it could be age fraud, where people are pretending to be an age that they are not. It could be sort of manipulation of matches. Those are large parts of the way sport has always been played. It's nothing new, right? People trying to get an edge. There are clearly social and economic motivators to cheat, which are extrinsic motivators. Clearly, you don't feel good when you're cheating, right? But you're getting the downside of feeling bad, and I know that I cheated, and the lie you're telling yourself is more than offset with the adulation, with the fame, with the maybe even the financial reward. And you need to be getting people understanding why the values of sport matter more than just personal achievement. But we will struggle in a country where we actually are not, we don't value sport, we value celebrity and fame. So people are after not self-actualization, which is living a full life and integrity between your outer life and your inner life, but it's about being famous, being recognized, being rewarded in very adulatory ways, rather than that the rewards of a personal journey.
True, sir. So, your foundation, the Go Sports Foundation, recently, Sumit Antal, he has won a gold medal in the World Para Athletics Championship in Delhi with the legend, a pioneer of Indian javelin, Neeraj Chopra, in attendance. Now, first of all, I would like to congratulate you for, as I know that he has been mentored by your foundation. How do you think we could like increase fan interest in Paralympic sports, just like they do have in normal sports?
Yeah, so all sports have to go through their arc of getting people excited and interested in them. And I think para sports is in a very unique space now. We've had multiple Paralympic games where India has done better and better and better. And at the most recent Paralympic Games, India won 29 medals, which is by far an outstanding achievement. So again, just understanding the role of sport in society and in the para sport space, when we started off, everyone treated these athletes as disabled people who are playing some sport. And we've seen a significant transition of these are essentially high performance athletes who happen to be disabled. And they're playing a completely legitimate sport, which could be slightly different from the sport we're used to, but it is no less of a sport, right? It is not some hyphenated sport that has been put into public domain just to include people. So recognizing the sporting achievement of people who might have a very different background, physical background, mental background, it is difficult because we are in a society that prefers to exclude than to include. Are these sports that can have massive audiences? Absolutely. The stories have to be told well. The people have to understand the significance of the achievement, the role that sport plays in breaking down many of these barriers. How do you do it? It's not an easy question. I don't have all the answers. If I did, I would be applying them right today. But are we going in a direction where sport can teach us a lot about people we know nothing about or are nothing like us? Absolutely. And I think that ability to break down barriers is a significant role that sport can play for us.
That is a very relevant real world application of the effect of sports. And sir, do you see pressure as something that makes athletes grow or something that actually holds them back?
I don't think there's a one answer to it. People respond very, very differently to pressure. What is pressure? Pressure is essentially the application of context to your ability to perform, right? It now is the final. There's only 5 minutes left. Different triggers of pressure. People have very different ways and means to respond to those stimuli. To me, the ones that are most balanced between, again, I talked about the outer game and the inner game, where you're confident of who you are, you've done the work ahead of time to understand why you're there, and you've done lots of the routines before, you're probably going to get less distracted by pressure. Pressure is a distraction, a distraction of context. And can you ignore it? You can't. The context is there. Can you allow it to affect you? Most people will. I think the great athletes figure out how to sort of ride through it.
Yeah, that is true. And I always believe that I am also an avid sports person myself. I partake in hockey and football tournaments. And there's this point before a match where you feel that I don't know if I'm going to be able to do this. What if I mess up during the match? And then there's another part of you telling yourself, this is not the mindset to have. You have to focus on what you have to do. And if you are scared of your job at any point of time, then you're not fit to do it. And that's a major part of what makes sport people great. Arav, would you like to close us off?
All right, so we'll be closing with one final question. So, sir, if you could leave our listeners with one question that they should think about, what would that be?
It could be related to anything at all, sir. Not necessarily sports, not necessarily law. Something that would make you in respect.
Yeah, I think the question I ask a lot of myself is, what is the life I would lead if there were no constraints? So if there was no constraints of money, no constraints of responsibility, what is the life you would make for yourself?
That is a question that we must all give time to ponder on. Well, that is it, ladies and gentlemen, for this Thought Talks episode. Thank you, sir, for joining us in our studio, and we will see you soon.